The sun sank low over the dry horizon as the rancher guided his only horse back toward the corral. Dust clung to his boots, his clothes worn thin from years of hard labor and harder luck. This was not a rich man. The land was stubborn, the cattle few, and the horse, his last, was more valuable than gold. Without it, he could not reach town easily, chase straying cattle, or defend his property. That horse was his survival. As he dismounted and began loosening the saddle, a faint sound reached his ears, soft footsteps in the weeds near the edge of the property. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence, but he paused when he saw two figures emerge from the shadows. They were strong, young Apache sisters, no more than 17 and 19. Their clothes were torn from travel, their faces streaked with dust and exhaustion. Fear lived in their eyes. They stood still as deer, unsure whether to flee or beg. The rancher studied them carefully. Years on the frontier had taught him that not all danger came with weapons. Sometimes danger arrived starving, barefoot, and silent. He asked no questions at first. Instead, he lowered his hands slowly, to show he meant no harm. "Are you lost?" he asked quietly. The younger sister shook her head, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. The older one stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We are being hunted." Those 3 words changed everything. The rancher knew what that meant on the frontier. There were many reasons young Apache women might be hunted. Rival tribes, cruel traders, violent outlaws, or even broken treaties. Whatever the reason, fear like theirs could not be faked. He led them to his small cabin and gave them water. They drank desperately, hands shaking. He offered them food, cornbread and dried meat. They ate cautiously at first, then with hunger that told him they hadn't eaten in days. Only after they had eaten did the older sister speak again. "Our village was attacked. Our father sent us away to save us. We were followed." The rancher felt a cold weight settle in his chest. If they were being tracked, danger was already near. Harboring them might mean death, but turning them away would surely mean worse. Night fell quickly. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind whispered through dry grass like warning voices. The rancher stepped outside and scanned the dark ridges beyond his land. He saw nothing, but he felt eyes somewhere beyond the hills. Inside, the sisters slept on old blankets near the hearth. Their breathing was shallow, fearful, even in rest. The rancher sat in his chair all night, rifle across his knees, eyes never fully closing. At first light, before the sun broke the horizon, the older sister woke. She saw the dark circles under his eyes and knew he had kept watch all night. "You should send us away," she said softly. "We bring death with us." He looked at his horse through the open door, the loyal animal grazing quietly in the gray morning mist. That horse had carried him through droughts, storms, and gunfights. It was more than an animal. It was his lifeline. Then he looked back at the sisters, tired, hunted, and young. "No," he said. "If you run on foot, they'll find you by noon." He stood up, grabbed the saddle, and without another word, walked to the corral. The sisters followed in confusion. He saddled the horse with steady hands. Then he placed the reins into the older sister's hands. "Take him." Her eyes widened in shock. "This is your only horse." "I know," he replied. "Without him, you cannot survive." He met her gaze calmly. You already weren't going to. The younger sister began to cry openly. The older one fell to her knees, pressing her forehead into the dust in gratitude and disbelief. He lifted her gently. Ride hard toward the river canyon. Follow it east. You'll lose any tracks there. But what about you? She asked. He glanced once more toward the empty land around his ranch. If they come, I'll face them. The sisters mounted together, riding bareback, clinging to each other as the horse surged forward. They vanished into the early morning fog, hooves fading into nothing. When the dust finally settled, the ranch stood silent and defenseless. The rancher returned to his porch and waited. As the sun began to rise higher, a distant thunder rolled across the land. At first he thought it was weather. Then the sound grew heavier, rhythmic, alive. Horses, hundreds of them. He climbed the ridge behind his cabin, just as the first rays of sunlight spilled over the plains. What he saw made his blood run cold. 200 Apache warriors rode toward his land. Their war paint gleamed in the dawn. Spears, rifles, and bows caught the morning fire. At their head rode a tall, powerful warrior, with silver in his hair and fury in his eyes. The father had come, and the rancher stood alone, without a horse. The sisters rode until their lungs burned, and their arms ached from clinging to the rancher's last horse. The gray morning mist swallowed them whole as the land opened into wide, empty plains. Every sound behind them made their hearts race. Every shadow felt like death closing in. Only when the sun climbed higher and no pursuit appeared did they finally slow the horse near the edge of the river canyon. The younger sister slid down first, knees trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. The older one followed, holding her upright. "He gave up everything for us," the younger whispered. "Why would a stranger do that?" The older sister stared back toward the distant hills, where the ranch disappeared into the haze. Guilt crushed her chest like a stone. "Because he is an honor man," she said, "and because now he will face our father alone." Fear flashed across the younger sister's face. "Our father will kill him." The older sister did not answer. She feared the same. They hid the horse among thick brush near the riverbank, where flowing water would scatter their trail. From there, they climbed the rocky path toward the narrow canyon that led toward safety. But their hearts were not at peace. Every step away from the ranch felt like a betrayal. As they climbed, memories flooded back, memories they had not yet shared with the rancher. 3 nights earlier, their village had burned under moonlight. It was not an attack by the white men, as so many believed. It was an internal war, a brutal clash between Apache factions over a forbidden alliance. Their father, the chief, had refused to sell tribal land to outlaw traders who sought to use it for weapons and human trafficking. Many warriors supported him. Some betrayed him. Blood spilled among kin. The sisters had witnessed their own uncle lead armed men into the village. Houses burned. Children screamed. Their mother died shielding them from a blade meant for the older sister. With dying breath, their mother forced them to run. Their father had pursued them through the inferno, cutting down attackers until he reached his daughters. He did not embrace them. He shoved survival into their hands. "Go," he commanded. "Ride until the land runs out. If they catch you, they will use you to break me." They fled, while the village devoured itself in fire and betrayal. But enemies had followed their trail. By the 3rd night, they knew hunters were close. That was when they stumbled upon the ranch, exhausted, starving, desperate. and found a stranger who should have turned them away. Instead, he gave them his last horse. Far away on the ranch, while the sisters struggled with guilt and distance, the rancher prepared for death. After watching the warriors crest the horizon, he returned to his cabin and did something he had not done in years. He cleaned his weapons carefully, not in haste, but with respect. He set the old hunting rifle by his window and the revolver on the table. He poured the last of his water into a tin cup and drank slowly. He had already accepted the truth. He would not outrun 200 warriors on foot, but he would not beg either. As the sun climbed higher, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Dust clouds rose like storm walls. The rancher stood on his porch, hands visible, body still. The warriors surrounded the property in perfect silence, forming a wide iron ring. 200 riders, 200 weapons. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. At last, the tall warrior with silver threaded in his braids rode forward. His presence alone commanded authority. His eyes were sharp, ancient, and burning with grief. The rancher felt the full weight of those eyes. "You sheltered my daughters," the chief said in a deep, steady voice. The rancher nodded. "They were hurt. They were afraid. I did what any man should." "You gave them a horse," the chief continued. "Your only one." The rancher nodded again. "Why?" The rancher took a small breath. "Because without it, they would be dead. And because some things are worth more than surviving." A murmur rolled through the warriors. Some saw him as foolish, others as brave, a few as a threat. The chief lifted his hand, silencing them. "Do you know what you have interfered with, rancher?" he asked. "I know they were being hunted," the rancher replied. That was enough. The chief studied him for a long moment. "You did not ask who hunted them." It didn't matter. Silence stretched between them. Then the chief surprised everyone by dismounting. He stepped onto the dry earth, standing unarmed before the rancher. The warriors stiffened, but obeyed his silent command. "You sheltered my blood," he said. "In our law, that makes you responsible for their fate." The rancher swallowed. "Then I accept that responsibility." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. "If they die because of your choice, their blood also touches your hands." The rancher met his gaze without shaking. "Then my hands will be red, but not from cowardice." That answer struck deeper than any bullet. The chief turned away briefly, scanning the distant plains as if looking for the invisible threads of fate. At last, he looked back. "My daughters are not safe yet," he said. "They are still being hunted by men who wear my tribe's symbol, but do not follow my heart." "You came with 200 warriors," the rancher said. "Why not hunt those men instead of surrounding me?" The chief's voice hardened. "Because I needed to see the man who chose my daughters' lives over his own." The wind lifted dust between them like drifting ghosts. "Some men give from abundance," the chief continued. "Others give from their last breath. Those men are rare." He stepped closer to the rancher. "But I do not yet know if you acted from honor or from foolish pride." The rancher did not speak. He did not need to. The chief extended his hand and revealed a small, carved bone whistle, the signal for parley or death in Apache law. "If my daughters live," he said quietly, "you live." A warrior rode forward at full speed. He leaned down, speaking urgently in the chief's ear. The message stole the calm from the leader's face. "They have picked up the girl's trail near the river," the warrior said. The chief's eyes blazed. "Now," he said, turning back to the rancher. The debt of your gift will be tested in blood. Dawn broke over the plains like a slow, burning fire, painting the dusty horizon in shades of blood and gold. The rancher stood on his porch as the first light touched the land, his shadow stretching long across the cracked earth. He had not slept. He had not moved much either. He only watched and waited. The Apache warriors tightened their circle around the ranch in complete silence. 200 riders formed a living wall of muscle, steel, and resolve. Horses snorted softly, leather creaked, feathers and war paint stirred in the morning wind. Every warrior sat ready, disciplined, lethal. The rancher had faced danger before, but never danger shaped like this. Never danger that filled the entire horizon. At the center of it all stood the sister's father. The chief mounted his horse once again and lifted his hand. Instantly, every sound vanished. Even the wind seemed to pause. "My daughters were last seen riding east," he announced. "Their enemies follow the same trail, but with evil in their hearts." He turned his gaze back to the rancher. "Today, their lives will be decided. So will yours." The rancher nodded once. He no longer tried to deny his fate. With a sharp gesture, the chief sent half of his warriors thundering toward the river canyon in pursuit of the sisters' hunters. The remaining warriors stayed behind, watching the rancher with unblinking eyes. Minutes passed like centuries. Then gunfire cracked the distant air. The sharp echo of rifle shots bounced through the canyon, faint but unmistakable. The rancher tightened his fists. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the sisters were close to death again. Another volley followed. Then screams, too far away to make out words, but close enough to recognize pain. The chief listened without flinching. He had known battle his entire life, but his hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, but from being a father. The rancher watched the chief carefully. For the first time, he understood the weight this man carried. This was not just a warrior. This was a leader fighting betrayal, enemies, and the threat of losing his children all at once. Time stretched painfully slow. Then, from the east, a lone rider appeared at full speed. He rode like death itself chased him. As the rider drew closer, the warriors parted. The man slid from his horse and dropped to one knee before the chief. "They found the hunters," he said, breathless. 5 men, all dead." The chief closed his eyes in a long exhale. "And my daughters?" he demanded. "They escaped as you hoped," the messenger replied. "But they were wounded. One was struck by a bullet through the shoulder. The other fell while running. The horse still carried them." "They are slowing." The chief's jaw tightened. He turned toward the rancher. "If my daughters die," he said coldly, "your kindness will turn to crime in my eyes." Before the rancher could reply, another sound broke the tension. Hooves from the south. This time, the riders were not Apache. A small band of armed men burst over the ridge, galloping hard toward the ranch. They wore mismatched clothes, carried modern rifles, and moved with wild purpose. These were not tribal warriors. These were the outlaw traffickers who had followed the sisters from the very beginning. One of the Apache warriors shouted, "Enemies!" Chaos erupted instantly. The air cracked with explosions of gunfire. Apache arrows soared like dark birds. Dust exploded where bullets struck the earth. The rancher dove from his porch as bullets tore through the wooden posts of his cabin. The outlaws charged straight into the circle of warriors, firing wildly. The chief drew his rifle and fired with deadly precision. One outlaw fell instantly. Another tumbled from his horse as an arrow pierced his throat. But the outlaws were ruthless and desperate. They did not plan to survive. They only meant to kill. One of them swung wide, aiming directly at the rancher's cabin. A bullet smashed through the window, inches from where the rancher had taken cover. He rolled inside and grabbed his old rifle, hands steady despite the chaos. For the first time that day, he chose to fight. He leaned through the broken window and fired once. The outlaw dropped. Outside, Apache warriors collided with the remaining attackers in brutal close combat. Blades flashed. Horses reared and screamed. Dust rose so thick it turned the battlefield into a boiling storm. The chief dismounted and charged an outlaw who had broken through their line. They crashed into each other near the corral. The outlaw fired first, grazing the chief's arm. The chief responded with a knife to the man's chest. The final outlaw tried to flee. Before he reached the ridge, an arrow sank into his back and pinned him to the ground. Silence fell again, heavy, sudden, absolute. Bodies lay scattered across the land. Blood soaked into the dust. Smoke drifted lazily into the brightening sky. The rancher stepped cautiously from his cabin, rifle still raised. His eyes moved over the fallen men, Apache and outlaw alike. He felt no triumph, only sorrow. The chief walked toward him, slowly. "You chose to fight," he said. "They attacked my home," the rancher replied, "and your daughters." The chief studied him again, closer this time, not as an enemy, but as a man measuring another man's soul. "You fought, knowing you had no army," the chief said. "I fought because there was no one else left to stand." That answer changed something. Another Apache rider approached at full speed from the east. His face held terrible tension. "The sisters," he called. The chief turned sharply. "Speak." "They reached the canyon's far side," the rider said. "They collapsed from blood loss, but they live." A sound escaped the chief that no warrior had ever heard from him before. A broken, trembling breath of relief. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were no longer the eyes of a man hunting judgment. They were the eyes of a father who had nearly lost everything. He turned toward the rancher and bowed his head. "Because you gave your last horse," he said, "my daughters still breathe." The rancher lowered his rifle for the first time. "But the law of my people still demands test," the chief continued. "Your life is not yet safe. Honor must be proven, not assumed." The rancher nodded. "Then I will prove it." The warriors tightened their circle again, not with hunger this time, but with expectation. The chief raised his voice. "At sunrise tomorrow," he declared, "this man will stand before my tribe, and there his fate will be decided." The night passed without sleep on either side of the silent battlefield. The bodies of the fallen had been carried away. Fires burned low. The Apache warriors camped in disciplined rings beyond the ranch, their shadows moving like spirits across the dust. The rancher remained alone on his porch, bound by no rope, yet freer than a man in chains had ever felt, because now his fate lay in truth rather than fear. When the first red line of sunrise cut through the dark, the chief's voice carried across the plain like thunder. "It is time." Two warriors approached the rancher respectfully and motioned for him to follow. He left his cabin, without his rifle, without his revolver, bringing only his empty hands and steady steps. They led him to a wide circle formed by the entire tribe, Men, women, and elders stood in silence. War paint had been washed away. This was not a court of battle. It was a court of truth. At the center stood the chief. Behind him, seated on blankets near the fire, were the two sisters. They were pale, bandaged, and weak, but alive. The younger sister wept openly when she saw the rancher. The older one pressed her hand to her heart and bowed her head deeply. The rancher felt his chest tighten. For the first time since this began, he felt something other than fear. He felt hope. The chief raised his staff, and the tribe fell into complete silence. "This man gave his only horse to save my daughters," the chief announced. "Such a gift demands judgment, but judgment must be earned, not granted." He turned to the rancher. "You will face 3 tests, not of strength, not of violence, but of honor." The rancher nodded once. "I am ready." The first test, the test of truth. The chief gestured to an elder woman who stepped forward, her face lined with 100 winters. "She will speak truth into your heart," the chief said. "If you lie, you die." The elder studied the rancher for a long moment. Then she asked, "Why did you give your last horse to 2 strangers who could have brought death to your door?" The rancher did not pause. "Because I saw fear in their eyes," he said, "and I once fled fear too. I survived because someone showed mercy. I repaid that debt." The elder's eyes never left his face. Then she nodded slowly. "He speaks truth," she said. A whisper moved through the tribe. The second test, the test of loss. The chief raised his hand again. "You were willing to give your last horse. Now you must prove you can also accept loss." 2 warriors brought forward what remained of the ranch itself. Broken fencing, ruined supplies from the battle, and finally, something that struck the rancher like a blade through the heart. They led forward his horse, the same horse, alive, but badly wounded. A deep gash ran along its flank. It walked only with difficulty. The chief's eyes did not blink. "Your horse survived the hunt," he said, "but it will never run again. You may take it, or you may leave it to die among us." The rancher's throat closed. That horse had been his partner for years. Without it, he could not farm, travel, or defend his land. Yet even broken, leaving it would be abandoning a life he was responsible for. The tribe watched without a breath. Slowly, the rancher stepped forward and placed his hand on the horse's neck. "We survived together," he said softly, "and we will endure together. I will not leave him." The chief nodded. "You choose responsibility over convenience. That is the second mark of honor." The younger sister began to cry harder. The third test, the test of blood without violence. The final test was the most dangerous of all. "You fought my enemies," the chief said, "but now you must prove that you do not crave blood." A warrior stepped forward, holding a knife and a shallow bowl. With one quick motion, he cut the rancher's palm. Blood flowed into the bowl. The chief then cut his own palm and let his blood fall into the same vessel. "This act binds souls," the chief said. "If you betray my family, my blood will call your death. If I betray you, your blood will call mine. This is older than war." The rancher did not hesitate. He held the bowl steady. The blood of 2 worlds mixed in silence. Then the chief did something that shocked the tribe. He lowered his forehead and touched it to the rancher's forehead. A bond had been sealed. The father's verdict. The chief stepped back and faced his people. This man gave without knowing reward. He fought without seeking glory. He accepted loss without blame. By our law and by my heart, he is no longer a stranger. Then the chief turned to the rancher. My daughters live because of you. From this sunrise forward, your life is under my protection. Any hand raised against you will answer to my tribe. The crowd erupted, not in war cries, but in a rising murmur of acceptance. The rancher felt his knees weaken with relief he had not allowed himself to feel until now. The chief then knelt beside his daughters. The older sister bowed low. Father, he saved us. The chief placed his hand on her bandaged shoulder. And now he will not walk alone in this world again. He looked up at the rancher. You gave them the only thing that stood between them and death, he said. Now I will give you something that will stand between you and destruction. He stood and raised his voice to the tribe. From this day forward, this man is under my name. A gasp rippled through the people. To be placed under a chief's name meant unbreakable protection, alliance, and trust. The rancher bowed his head in stunned silence. The chief stepped closer and spoke quietly so only he could hear. You lost a horse, he said, but today you gain a people. For the first time since the sisters had arrived at his ranch, the rancher felt peace settle into his bones. The days that followed the chief's judgment reshaped the land in quiet, irreversible ways. Where fear had once ruled the dusty plains around the ranch, now the steady presence of Apache warriors moved with calm purpose. They did not occupy the land as conquerors. They came as guardians. Tents rose at the edge of the ranch, not as a show of force, but as a sign of protection. Hunters ranged the hills. Scouts watched the valleys. Any outlaw who drifted too close vanished before nightfall. For the first time in years, the rancher slept without his rifle in his hands. His horse, though wounded beyond its former strength, survived. The rancher built a shaded shelter for it near the corral, tending its wounds every morning and evening. The animal would never carry heavy loads again, but it lived, slowly, stubbornly, just like its owner. The sisters recovered beneath the careful hands of tribal healers who remained near the ranch. The younger one healed quickly in body, but not in spirit. Nightmares woke her screaming. The older sister healed more slowly, her bullet wound burning with every change in weather. But her eyes never left the horizon, as if searching for the man who had given up everything for them. The rancher visited them each day, never intruding, never demanding gratitude. Sometimes he brought water, sometimes he brought food, mostly he brought quiet. One evening, as the sun bled into the hills, the older sister finally spoke the words that had weighed on her heart since the night of their escape. You lost your life as it was, because of us. The rancher stirred the fire without looking at her. Life is always lost, he said. It's whether it's lost for nothing that matters. She studied him through the dancing firelight. Our enemies still live, she said, the men who burned our village. They will not stop. I know, he replied. That same night, distant riders were spotted far beyond the eastern ridge, small numbers, moving like scavengers. The message spread through both camps quickly. The danger was not gone. It was waiting. Before sunrise, the chief summoned the rancher to a private fire outside the circle of warriors. They sat opposite each other, like equals now, not as judge and condemned. Our enemies regroup in the hills, the chief said. They believe you are the weak point. They think if they break you, my daughters will follow. The rancher nodded. They're right about one thing. They'll come for me. The chief's eyes hardened, and we will use that. A plan was formed, simple, dangerous, and final. The ranch would appear abandoned. The warriors would withdraw into the surrounding canyons, invisible. The rancher would remain alone, a lure for death. At dusk on the third day, the dust rose again on the southern ridge. This time, the riders were many. The traders from the tribe, the traffickers who financed them, the men who had burned a village and tried to claim 2 daughters as property. They rode without fear now. They believed the war was won. The rancher stood on his porch as he had on the first morning. Alone, unarmed in appearance, the empty plains around him, stretching wide and silent. The outlaws approached in a loose circle, rifles raised. Their leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, rode forward. "We know what you gave," the man sneered, "and now we come to collect the rest of your life." The rancher did not move. "You already took enough," he said. Laughter rippled through the attackers. Then the rancher raised one hand. From the hills, the earth itself seemed to breathe. Warriors erupted from stone and shadow in all directions. Arrows darkened the sky. Gunfire thundered from hidden ridges. The ambush closed like a steel trap. The outlaws panicked. Some tried to flee. Horses fell screaming beneath them. Others fired blindly into the dust. A few charged in madness and died where they rode. The traitors among them realized their betrayal too late. The chief himself rode at the front of the storm, his rifle steady, his face carved from vengeance and justice both. Within minutes, it was over. Smoke drifted across the land. Groans faded into silence. The last of the evil that had hunted the sisters lay broken in the dust. The chief dismounted beside the rancher. "It is finished," he said. The rancher nodded once, but his eyes were not on the dead. They were on the land, on the future that now stood open and uncertain. In the days that followed, the tribe began what they had not been able to do before: rebuild. Survivors from the destroyed village were brought to safety. New shelters rose. Weapons were lowered for the first time in many seasons. The chief kept his promise. Trade returned. The land around the ranch became a corridor of shared survival. Apache hunters protecting cattle routes, the rancher sharing food, water, and shelter. Walls that had been built by fear for generations slowly cracked. One evening, as the first stars appeared, the sisters came to the rancher together. The younger held a small woven band in her hands. The older carried herself with quiet strength. "Our father wishes for us to remain near your land," the older sister said. "Not as refugees, but as neighbors." The rancher hesitated, then nodded. They tied the woven band around the post of his porch, a symbol of protection, family, and shared blood. From that night on, the ranch was no longer just a lonely outpost. It was a bridge. Seasons passed. The wounded horse lived quietly until old age finally took him. When he died, Apache warriors helped bury him beneath a lone cedar tree on the ridge. The rancher stood beside the chief as the wind sang across the hills. "You gave him rest," the chief said. "He gave me a life," the rancher replied. Years later, travelers would pass through the land and speak in hushed tones of a strange alliance, a lone rancher and a powerful Apache tribe, bound by a single act of mercy. They would speak of peace born from sacrifice. They would speak of a man who gave his last horse, and gained a people. And they would speak of two sisters who rode into the dawn, pursued by death, but returned to a future forged by honor.